Listen here, you foolish old woman. You're going to leave that $25 million to my wife and the estate to her family, or we will leave you on the street. A poor woman like you will never survive alone." Ethan's words echoed in my ears like a hammer striking metal, over and over, as I stood in the middle of my own living room, trembling from head to toe. My son, the child I carried in my womb, whom I nursed, whom I raised with all my love, had just called me a foolish old woman. He had just threatened to leave me on the street if I didn't hand over everything I had built over 15 years of tireless work. And the worst part was the smirk of satisfaction on the face of Heather, my daughter-in-law, who was lounging on my sofa as if she already owned the place. But let me go back 3 months, to when this all began. Because what Ethan and Heather didn't know was that I was about to surprise them profoundly, in a way they could never have imagined. And that night, when he uttered those words full of venom and arrogance, it only confirmed that my plan had been the right decision. The best decision of my life. It all started in July, on a hot afternoon when I was reviewing the financial statements of my investments in my home office. At 72 years old, I still personally managed every dollar of my fortune. $25 million isn't built by being careless or blindly trusting others. When my husband died 15 years ago, many thought I wouldn't survive on my own, that I would end up selling the family business for pennies on the dollar. But I proved them all wrong. I took the 3 small hardware stores we owned and turned them into a chain of 15 stores across the state. I invested in real estate when no one was betting on certain up-and-coming neighborhoods, and those properties are now worth 10 times more. I was shrewd, hardworking, and ruthless when I had to be. That day in July, my phone rang. It was Ethan. "Mom, Heather and I want to come visit you this weekend. We need to talk to you about something important." His voice sounded strangely cheerful, almost anxious. I felt a pang of joy mixed with concern. Ethan had been distant for the last few months. Our conversations had dwindled to brief, cold calls every 2 or 3 weeks. I thought maybe he was finally going to give me the news I had been hoping for, that I was going to be a grandmother. After 5 years of marriage, I had nearly lost hope, but maybe this was the moment. "Of course, sweetheart. My arms are wide open," I replied, feeling my heart race with anticipation. "I'll make your favorite meal." Ethan laughed on the other end of the line, but it was a strange, hollow laugh. "Don't go to too much trouble, Mom. We just want to have a quiet talk. It's about your future, about how we can help you now that you're getting older." The phrase "getting older" hit me like a slap in the face. I felt perfectly capable, with enviable health for my age. I walked 3 miles every morning, managed my own affairs, traveled whenever I wanted. What kind of help was he talking about? On Saturday, they arrived in a new car, a luxury model that must have cost at least $80,000. Ethan worked as a manager at a tech company. He made good money, but not enough for that kind of extravagance. Heather didn't work, preferring to dedicate herself to what she called social networking, which basically meant endless lunches with other executives' wives and ridiculously expensive yoga classes. I greeted them with a smile, hugging Ethan tightly, feeling him stiffen in my arms. Heather greeted me with her typical coolness, giving me 2 air kisses near my cheeks without actually touching me. We went into the living room, that spacious room with large windows overlooking the gardens I had designed myself. I served coffee and the pecan pie I'd baked that morning. Ethan took a sip and set his cup aside. "Mom, let's get straight to the point. Heather and I have been talking a lot about you. You're getting older, living alone on this huge estate, managing a considerable fortune without professional help. We're worried something might happen to you and everything will get complicated. We want to help you organize your affairs, to make your life easier." I frowned, not quite understanding where the conversation was going. "Son, I'm perfectly fine. I've been managing my businesses for 15 years without any problems." Heather leaned forward, that condescending smile that irritated me so much on her face. "Lillian, dear, we all know you've done a wonderful job, but let's be realistic. At your age, things get more difficult. Mistakes are more common. It would be terrible if you lost everything you've built because of one careless slip-up. That's why we think it would be wise for Ethan to start getting more involved in managing your assets. Eventually, it will all be his anyway. Isn't that right?" A chill went down my spine. There was something in the way Heather said those words, something possessive and calculating that put me on high alert. Eventually, it will all be his, as if I were already dead, as if my life and my decisions no longer mattered. I looked at Ethan, waiting for him to say something, to correct his wife, to defend me. But my son just nodded, supporting every word that came out of that woman's mouth. "I appreciate your concern," I said carefully, choosing each word. "But I don't need help. I have Arthur, my trusted attorney for 20 years. He advises me on everything. Besides, my mental faculties are intact. I can make my own decisions." End of teen. Heather let out a little laugh that made my skin crawl. "Oh, Lillian, nobody is saying you can't make decisions. We're just suggesting it would be easier for everyone if Ethan had power of attorney over your accounts. You know, just in case something happens to you. An accident, a sudden illness. These things happen at your age." Ethan cleared his throat, uncomfortable but determined. "Mom, we also think this estate is too big for you. So much land, so much empty house. Wouldn't it be better if you moved into something smaller, more manageable? A comfortable apartment in the city, close to us. You could sell this property. The money would be added to your investments, and you'd live more peacefully." My hands began to tremble. This estate had been my home for 35 years. I raised Ethan here. I buried my husband here in the garden. Under the oak tree he planted himself. Every corner held a memory. Every room told a story of my life. "I'm not selling my home," I said firmly. "This estate stays with me until the day I die." Ethan sighed, exchanging a look with Heather that I couldn't fully decipher, but it filled me with unease. "All right, Mom. We just wanted to bring it up. But at least think about the power of attorney. It would just be a precaution." I shook my head. "It's not necessary. Son, when the time comes, we'll see. For now, everything is under control." The tension in the room was palpable. Heather was pressing her lips together in visible frustration, and Ethan looked disappointed, like a child who had been denied a toy. The rest of the visit was awkward, filled with heavy silences and forced conversations. When they finally left, I stood in the doorway watching them drive away, a knot in my stomach that wouldn't go away. Something had changed in my son. Something fundamental and terrifying. Or maybe it had always been there, and I had been too blind to see it. Over the next few weeks, Ethan's calls became more frequent, but less warm. He always asked about my finances, my properties, my future plans. "Mom, have you updated your will yet? Mom, have you thought about setting up a trust? Mom, Arthur is getting really old. Shouldn't you find a younger lawyer?" Each question was a drop of poison that was slowly poisoning our relationship. And Heather was always there, in the background, listening, suggesting, manipulating. One afternoon in August, I decided to visit my friend Carol. We had known each other for 40 years, since our sons went to kindergarten together. She was the only person I could talk to honestly, without filters or pretense. We sat on her small balcony, drinking lemonade while I told her everything that was happening. Carol listened in silence, her wrinkled face showing more and more concern. "Lillian, be very careful," she said finally, taking my hand in hers. "I've heard terrible stories of children who strip their elderly parents of everything. They use every means possible. Declarations of mental incompetence, fraudulent powers of attorney, psychological manipulation. I don't want to scare you, but Ethan is no longer the boy you knew. Heather has him completely wrapped around her finger, and that woman only sees dollar signs when she looks at you." Her words chilled me to the bone, because deep down, I knew she was right. But to admit it meant accepting that I had lost my son, that a mother's love hadn't been enough to keep him on the right side. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering at what point it had all gone wrong. At what point my son had decided my money was more important than my love. The answer came 2 weeks later, in the most unexpected and devastating way. Ethan called me on a Friday afternoon. "Mom, Heather and I want to invite you to dinner at our house tomorrow. It's been a while since we've shared a quiet meal." The invitation pleasantly surprised me. Maybe I had been overreacting. Maybe it was all a product of my imagination and irrational fears. I accepted enthusiastically. I even bought an expensive bottle of wine to bring. On Saturday, I dressed with care, putting on an olive green dress that Ethan always said looked beautiful on me. I drove to their house, a modern home in an exclusive neighborhood that I had helped them buy by giving them 50% of the down payment. Heather opened the door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Come in, Lillian," Heather said in that honeyed voice she used when she wanted something. "Ethan is just finishing up dinner." I walked into the living room and immediately noticed something was different. On the dining room table was a thick folder, legal documents peeking out from the edges. My gut screamed at me to run, but this was my son, my own flesh and blood. How could I distrust him like this? Ethan came out of the kitchen, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Hi, Mom. So glad you could make it. Please, sit down." His tone was strangely formal, as if he were in a business meeting and not welcoming his mother. I sat on the sofa, clutching my purse tighter than necessary. Heather sat next to me, too close, invading my personal space. Ethan took a seat across from us, and suddenly I felt like I was in an interrogation. "Mom, we were honest with you the last time we spoke," Ethan began, his eyes avoiding mine. "We're really worried about you. You've been acting strangely lately, making decisions that don't make any sense." My heart started to beat faster. "Strange decisions? What are you talking about, Ethan? I haven't done anything out of the ordinary." "Alu." Heather placed her hand on my knee, a gesture meant to be comforting but felt like a claw. "Lillian, dear, the other day you told Ethan you saw his father in the garden. Your husband passed away 15 years ago. That kind of confusion is concerning." I felt as if I'd been doused with ice water. I never said that. Never. What I told Ethan was that I had dreamed about his father. A beautiful dream where he told me he was proud of me. A dream. "Ethan, I specifically told you it was a dream." "Oh." My son looked away, uncomfortable. "Well, maybe I misheard, but the point is, at your age, these mix-ups are normal. That's why we brought these documents. We've consulted with a lawyer, and he helped us prepare a full power of attorney. We just need your signature. That way I can handle your accounts, your properties, everything. It will be easier for you. You won't have to worry about a thing." I stood up so quickly, I felt dizzy for a second. "You're asking me to sign over total control of my estate because you supposedly think I'm confused? Ethan, I told you it was a dream. I'm not senile, I'm not confused, and I am definitely not signing any document that takes away my autonomy." Heather stood up too, her mask of sweetness beginning to crack. "Lillian, you're being irrational. We just want to protect you. What if you have a stroke tomorrow? Who's going to manage your affairs? Your ancient lawyer who probably has one foot in the grave." Rage began to boil inside me. Arthur is 68 years old and perfectly capable. And even if he weren't, that doesn't give you the right to take control of my life. I am perfectly capable of making my own decisions. Ethan stood as well, and for the first time, I saw real hostility in his eyes. "Mom, stop being so stubborn. This is going to happen one way or another. We can do this the easy way, with your cooperation, or we can do it another way." "Are you threatening me?" I asked, my voice trembling with disbelief and pain. "Ethan, I'm your mother. I gave you life. I raised you alone after your father died. I worked day and night to give you the best education. And this is how you repay me? By trying to steal what I built with my own hard work?" Heather let out a cold laugh. "Steal? Please, Lillian, let's be honest. You didn't build anything. Your husband already had the hardware stores when he died. You just got lucky with a few investments. And now you're old, alone, and frankly, you're a burden. Ethan is your only heir. Sooner or later, it will all be his. We're just speeding up the inevitable." Tears began to stream down my cheeks. I looked at my son, waiting for him to say something, to defend my honor, to remember everything I had sacrificed for him. But Ethan just stared at the floor, like a coward. Heather was right about one thing. I no longer recognized the man in front of me. I left that house without another word. I drove back to my estate with my hands shaking on the steering wheel, tears blurring my vision. When I arrived, I locked myself in my room and cried like I hadn't cried since my husband's death. But the next day, when the sun rose and light streamed through my window, something had changed in me. The pain was still there, deep and piercing, but alongside it, something else had emerged. Determination. If my son and that viper of a wife thought I was going to hand over my life's work without a fight, they were dead wrong. I had survived the death of my husband. I had built an empire from scratch. I had faced down men in boardrooms who didn't take me seriously. I was not going to let two greedy people destroy me. I called Arthur that very morning. "I need to see you urgently," I said. "It's about Ethan." Arthur arrived at my house that afternoon with his worn leather briefcase and that wise look that only comes from years of experience. We sat in my office, and I told him everything. The visits, the insistent questions, the disastrous dinner, the thinly veiled threats. Arthur listened in silence, taking occasional notes. When I finished, he sighed deeply. "Lillian, this is more serious than I thought. I've seen cases like this before. What Ethan and Heather are planning is called elder financial abuse. It's more common than people think. They might try to have you declared mentally incompetent, get doctors to testify in their favor, forge documents. They're capable of anything." "What can I do?" I asked, feeling the weight of helplessness. Arthur opened his briefcase and took out some papers. "First, we're going to protect your assets. We can create an irrevocable trust, transfer properties to legal entities they can't touch. Second, I need you to get full medical evaluations with specialists I know, so there's an official record that you are in full command of your mental faculties. Third, we're going to document everything, every call, every visit, every threat." We worked for hours that day. Arthur made calls, prepared documents, arranged appointments. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was regaining some control. But what I didn't know was that Ethan and Heather weren't going to sit idly by. They were preparing their own plan, one much darker and more twisted than I could ever imagine. 2 weeks after my meeting with Arthur, Ethan showed up at my estate unannounced. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was in the garden pruning the rose bushes I had planted years ago. I heard the sound of his car, and my body tensed instinctively. This time he came alone, without Heather, and that somehow unsettled me even more. When I saw him get out of the car, I noticed something different in his expression. There was a hardness in his jaw, a coldness in his eyes that I had never seen before. "Mom, we need to talk," he said without even a greeting. I set the pruning shears on the garden table and took off my gardening gloves, trying to stay calm. "Of course, son. Do you want to come inside?" He shook his head. "Here is fine. I'm not staying long." He stood in front of me, arms crossed, like a judge about to deliver a sentence. "I've been thinking a lot about our last conversation. I know you were upset, but you need to understand we only want what's best for you. Ethan, what's best for me is for you to leave me to live my life in peace," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't need you to manage my money. I don't need you to make decisions for me. I am a grown, capable woman." He let out a bitter laugh. "Capable? Mom, you're 72 years old. Do you know how many people your age are already in nursing homes because they can't take care of themselves? You should be grateful we still care about you." His words hurt more than any physical blow. Grateful? I should be grateful that my own son is threatening to take everything I have? Ethan took a step toward me, and for the first time in my life, I felt afraid of my own child. "No one is threatening you, Mom. We're just telling you the reality. You're old, you're alone, and frankly, you're not going to last much longer. Why not make things easier and give us access to your accounts now? That way, when something happens to you, we won't have to deal with endless legal paperwork." I stepped back, feeling tears begin to sting my eyes. "Ethan, are you wishing for my death? Is that what I've become to you? An obstacle between you and the money?" He shrugged with an indifference that froze my soul. "Don't be dramatic. I'm just being practical. Heather and I have plans, projects that need funding. We have debts to pay, and you're sitting on $25 million that you don't even use. It's selfish of you to refuse to help your own family." "Debts?" I asked, a piece of the puzzle starting to fall into place. "What kind of debts, Ethan?" He looked away, clearly uncomfortable. "That's none of your business. The point is, we need money, and you have it. It's simple math." I'm B. In that moment, I understood that my son wasn't just changed. He was desperate, and desperate people are capable of anything. I realized I had to act fast. That very evening, I called Arthur and told him about Ethan's visit. "Lillian, this is very serious," he said, his voice laced with concern. "If they have significant debts, the pressure is only going to increase. We need to accelerate the process of protecting your assets. First thing tomorrow, we'll start transferring properties into the trust. And I want you to consider installing security cameras in your house. We need to document any interaction you have with them." The thought of spying on my own son made my stomach turn, but I knew Arthur was right. The next day, a technician came and installed discrete cameras in the main areas of the house: the living room, the kitchen, the office, and the front entrance. I also activated the recording feature for all my phone calls. I felt like a spy in my own home, but it was necessary. I didn't have to wait long to validate my decision. 3 days later, Ethan showed up again, but this time he brought Heather and 2 people I didn't know: a middle-aged man with a briefcase and a young woman with a folder. "Mom, we brought you some visitors," Ethan announced with a fake smile. "This is Dr. Jennings, a psychiatrist specializing in geriatrics, and this is his assistant. We thought it would be a good idea for him to evaluate you, just to make sure everything is okay with your mental health." My heart skipped a beat. So that was their plan: get a doctor to declare me incompetent. I smiled with the same falseness as Ethan. How thoughtful, but I already have my own doctor, and he gave me a full evaluation last week. I'm perfectly fine. Dr. Jennings approached with a professional smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Lillian, a second opinion never hurts. It will just be a few simple questions. A conversation. You have nothing to worry about." Heather chimed in with her syrupy voice. "Oh, Lillian, don't be difficult. It's only half an hour. Or do you have something to hide? Maybe you know there's something wrong and that's why you're refusing the evaluation." I saw the trap. If I refused, they would claim it was because I was afraid of them discovering my supposed incompetence. If I agreed, this doctor, clearly in their pocket, would find some reason to declare me unfit. "All right," I said finally, "but on one condition. My lawyer, Arthur, must be present for the entire evaluation, and I want a copy of any report that's generated." Ethan frowned. "Why do you need your lawyer? Don't you trust us?" I answered, looking him straight in the eye. "No, Ethan, I don't trust you anymore. And that's the condition. Take it or leave my house right now." Dr. Jennings looked uncomfortably at Ethan and Heather. "Well, technically, the patient has the right to have a representative present." Ethan gritted his teeth, clearly furious, but he nodded. "Fine. Call your lawyer." I called Arthur, who arrived in less than 30 minutes. I also had my primary care physician, Dr. Miles, who had treated me for the last 10 years, come over. If they were going to evaluate me, it would be on my terms. The evaluation was a farce from the start. Dr. Jennings asked leading questions, trying to confuse me or make me seem disoriented. "What day is it today, Mrs. Lillian?" "Tuesday, August 27th, 2024, I answered clearly. "And who is the current president of the country?" I stated his name without hesitation. "Can you tell me what this object is for?" he asked, showing me a pencil. "It's a pencil, doctor. It's used for writing. I'm not stupid." Emble. After a series of basic questions, he moved on to more invasive ones. "Have you experienced any episodes of confusion recently? Have you seen or heard things that others don't? Have you had conversations with people who aren't there?" To every question, I responded with firmness and clarity, while Arthur took meticulous notes and Dr. Miles observed his colleague's methodology with growing disapproval. Finally, after 45 minutes, Dr. Jennings closed his folder. "Well, Mrs. Lillian, for now, everything seems to be in order. However, I would recommend more thorough evaluations in a controlled clinical setting. Sometimes the symptoms of early-onset dementia aren't apparent in brief evaluations." Arthur stood up immediately. "Doctor, Mrs. Lillian has just demonstrated that she is in full command of her mental faculties. Any suggestion to the contrary would be medically irresponsible and legally questionable." End of quote. Dr. Jennings paled slightly at Arthur's firmness, but Heather wasn't ready to give up so easily. She rose from the sofa where she had been watching the entire evaluation with a tense expression. "Doctor, you don't know Lillian like we do. She's very good at hiding her problems. Last week she got lost on her way to the grocery store, a place she's been to 1,000 times. She had to call Ethan to come and get her. I felt my blood boil. That is a complete lie. I have never been lost going to the grocery store. In fact, I haven't been to the grocery store in 2 weeks because I've been getting home deliveries. Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his chair, avoiding my gaze. Mom, maybe you don't remember. That's precisely the problem. Dr. Miles intervened, his voice carrying professional authority. Mr. Martinez, I regularly monitor your mother's health. Her cognitive exams are impeccable. Her memory is excellent for her age. There is no indication of any mental decline. Heather let out a hysterical laugh. Of course he's going to say that. You two are probably in cahoots. Maybe Lillian pays him extra to say what she wants to hear. Dr. Miles stood up, offended. Ma'am, I am putting my professional reputation on the line by being here. I have brought all of Mrs. Lillian's medical records from the last 5 years. I can show you every evaluation, every test. Her mental health is documented and sound. If you wish to question my professional ethics, I invite you to file a formal complaint with the medical board. The silence that followed was thick and heavy. Ethan stared at the floor like a scolded child, but Heather's cheeks were flushed with suppressed rage. Finally, Dr. Jennings cleared his throat uncomfortably. Well, I believe there's nothing more I can do here. Mrs. Lillian, based on my preliminary evaluation, I find no evidence of mental incapacity. However, I'll leave my card in case you need a consultation in the future. We all knew he was only saying that because Arthur and Dr. Miles were present. If I had been alone, his report would have been very different. After Dr. Jennings and his assistant left, the tension in the room was unbearable. Ethan and Heather remained seated, clearly unsure what to do now that their plan had failed. Arthur packed his documents into his briefcase with deliberately slow movements. Mr. Martinez, Mrs. Martinez, I want to make something very clear. Any further attempt to declare my client incompetent will be treated as fraud and elder abuse. I have complete documentation of everything that transpired here today. If necessary, I will not hesitate to press criminal charges. Ethan finally looked up, and what I saw in his eyes frightened me. There was no remorse, no shame. There was only pure, desperate rage. This isn't over, he said in a low, menacing voice. That's my inheritance, my future. I'm not going to let some meddling lawyer take what belongs to me. Arthur stepped closer to him, looking him directly in the eye. Nothing belongs to you while your mother is alive and in control of her faculties. And I suggest you reconsider your actions before this escalates into something you'll regret. Heather grabbed Ethan's arm, pulling him toward the door. Let's go. This old woman and her lackeys aren't worth our time. We'll find another way. Her words hung in the air like a clear threat. I watched them leave from the window, and when their car disappeared down the drive, my legs finally gave out. I collapsed onto the sofa, shaking from head to toe. Arthur and Dr. Miles rushed to my side. Lillian, are you all right? Do you need anything? Dr. Miles asked, taking my pulse. I shook my head, though I wasn't all right. Nothing was all right. I had just confirmed that my own son considered me an obstacle, something to be removed to get to my money. The pain was so deep it felt as though someone had ripped a hole in my chest. Over the next few days, I worked intensely with Arthur to protect my estate. We transferred properties to an irrevocable trust of which I was the lifetime beneficiary, but which upon my death would be distributed according to my terms, not automatically to Ethan. We moved investments into accounts that required multiple signatures for any transaction. We updated my will with specific clauses that protected against any attempt to contest it. But what I really needed to know was why. Why was Ethan so desperate? The debts he had mentioned kept me awake at night. I hired a private investigator, something I never thought I would do to my own son. I felt dirty, treacherous, but I needed the truth. The investigator, a professional man named Russo, delivered his report 2 weeks later. What I read chilled me to the bone. Heather had a gambling addiction she had hidden for years. She frequented online casinos and had racked up over $300,000 in debt. Ethan had maxed out all their credit cards, taken out loans against his salary, and even taken out a second mortgage on their house. They were on the brink of total bankruptcy. But that wasn't all. The investigator had discovered that Heather had contacted several lawyers specializing in declarations of mental incompetence. She had inquired about the legal processes, the timelines, the chances of success. She had also looked into retirement homes, specifically the cheapest and worst-rated ones in the area. Her plan was clear. Have me declared incompetent, take control of my money, pay the bare minimum for my care in some horrible place, and keep the rest. I felt nauseous reading the report. My daughter-in-law didn't just want my money, she wanted to get rid of me in the cruelest way possible. And Ethan, my son, the baby I had held in my arms, was letting it happen. Worse, he was actively participating. Photographs included in the report showed Ethan meeting with real estate agents, getting my estate appraised. He had ordered appraisals without my knowledge. He had inquired about the process of selling property when the owner is under legal guardianship. That night, Carol came to visit. She found me crying in the kitchen, the investigator's report spread across the table. My friend read the documents in silence, her face reflecting growing horror. "Oh, Lillian," she finally sighed, hugging me tightly. "I am so sorry, my love. No one should have to go through this, especially not from their own child." "Oh, I don't know what to do, Carol," I sobbed against her shoulder. "He's my son. Despite everything, he's my son. Part of me still wants to believe there's some of the boy I raised in there, that Heather has him manipulated, and that he can change." Carol gently pulled me back, looking at me with her wise, tired eyes. "Lillian, listen to me carefully. The boy you raised doesn't exist anymore. The man you have now chose money over you. He chose a manipulative woman over his own mother. And most importantly, he is threatening you, harassing you, trying to steal everything from you. No matter how much you love him, you have to protect yourself." She was right, of course. But a mother's heart doesn't understand logic. That night, I made a decision. If Ethan wanted a war, he would get one. But it would be on my terms, by my rules. And when it was all over, he would understand that underestimating a 72-year-old woman who had built an empire was the biggest mistake of his life. The next day, I began to execute my plan. First, I called Ethan. My voice was tired, defeated exactly how I wanted it to sound. "Son, I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened. Maybe you're right. Maybe I am being stubborn and difficult. I'd like you to come over so we can talk calmly, just you and me. No lawyers, no Heather, just mother and son." I could hear the surprise in his voice, followed quickly by a barely contained excitement. "Really, Mom? You're willing to reconsider?" "Yes," I replied, with a sigh I had practiced in the mirror. "I'm tired of fighting. I'm tired of being alone. If you think it's for the best, maybe we should talk about how to do this in an orderly fashion." Ethan could hardly contain his enthusiasm. "I'll be there tomorrow. Mom, you'll see, this is what's best for everyone. I promise." I hung up the phone, feeling a mixture of sadness and resolve. My son had taken the bait without a second thought. That afternoon, I met with Arthur in his office. When I explained my plan, he looked at me with a mix of admiration and concern. "Lillian, this is risky. If Ethan suspects anything, he could become more aggressive." "I know it's risky," I replied, "but I need concrete proof of his intentions. I need him to condemn himself with his own words. The cameras will record everything, and you will be listening live from your office, ready to intervene if things get out of control." Arthur nodded slowly. "All right. But at the first sign of physical threat, I'm calling the police. I won't risk your safety, no matter how much evidence we need." I spent the rest of the day emotionally preparing for what was to come. I felt like an actress getting ready for the most important role of her life. Except this wasn't theater. This was my real life, my real son, and the consequences would be permanent. Ethan arrived the next day at exactly 10 o'clock in the morning. He came alone as I had asked, but I could see his phone constantly vibrating in his pocket. Heather was surely sending him instructions, reminders, pressuring him. I greeted him with a sad smile and invited him into the living room. "Would you like some coffee?" I asked. "No thanks, Mom. I just want to talk." We sat across from each other, and I began my performance. "Ethan, I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about my age, about the burden I represent. about how complicated it would be for you if something happened to me suddenly. And I think you're right. Ethan's eyes lit up with a barely disguised greed. I'm so glad you understand, Mom. Really, this is all for your own good. End of chat. But before I make any decisions, I need to understand something, I continued, keeping my tone soft and vulnerable. Why the rush? Why now? I'm 72. Yes, I'm in good health. I could live another 10 or 15 years. Why can't you wait? Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. It's just that, well, the longer it goes on, the more complicated everything gets. Taxes, laws, everything changes. It's better to get it organized now while everything is clear. Or is it because of the debts? I asked directly, watching his face pale. What debts, Mom? I don't know what you're talking about. He lied, but his eyes gave him away. Ethan, I'm your mother. I know when you're lying to me. How much do you owe? 50,000? 100,000? He stood up, walking to the window, clearly agitated. That's none of your business, Mom. We just need access to some funds, temporarily, to resolve some situations. Oh, some situations like Heather's gambling debts. I dropped the bomb, watching as Ethan spun around to face me. How did you know about that? He stammered, his face now completely red. I know a lot of things, Ethan. I know Heather owes over $300,000 to online casinos. I know you've taken out a second mortgage on the house. I know you're on the verge of bankruptcy. And now I understand why you're suddenly so interested in my money. Ethan clenched his fists, his jaw tight. You spied on me. You hired investigators to spy on your own son. What kind of mother does that? A mother who is being threatened and manipulated by her own son, I replied, my voice now firmer. A mother who discovered her son is planning to have her declared incompetent to steal everything she owns. A mother who read reports about consultations with lawyers and cheap retirement homes. End of. Ethan was silent for a moment, and I could see the internal struggle on his face. Part of him looked ashamed, but the larger part, the part Heather had cultivated for years, was furious at being caught. He finally spoke, and his voice was cold as ice. Fine. Since you know everything, let's be honest. Yes, we need the money. Desperately. Heather has problems, but they're manageable if we have the funds. And yes, that money should be mine. I'm your only son, your only heir. Why should I have to wait for you to die to have what's going to be mine anyway? Because I am still alive, Ethan, I said, tears streaming down my cheeks. Because that money is mine. I earned it. I manage it. Because your father and I worked our entire lives to build something, and you have no right to demand it while I'm still breathing. Ethan took a step toward me, and for the first time, I saw something dangerous in his eyes. Mom, you are going to give me access to those accounts. You are going to sign the papers I need. Because if you don't, I will make your life a living hell. I will get you declared incompetent one way or another. I'll find doctors. I'll forge whatever is necessary. And when I have control, I will put you in the worst nursing home I can find. The direct threat was recorded perfectly by the hidden cameras. But Ethan wasn't finished. He sank onto the sofa, his head in his hands. You don't understand the pressure I'm under, Mom. Heather is going to leave me if we don't fix this. Her creditors are threatening legal action. We could lose the house. My reputation at work is on the line. Everything is falling apart, and you're sitting on $25 million that you don't even use. And that's my fault? I asked. Is it my responsibility to save your marriage? To pay the debts of a gambling addict? Ethan, when your father died, no one came to save me. No one handed me easy money. I worked, I fought, I took risks. If you and Heather are in trouble, it's because of your own choices. You can't come and steal my security to pay for your mistakes. He raised his head, and the look he gave me was filled with resentment. You were always like this, so perfect, so hardworking, so independent. You never needed anyone. You didn't even really need me after Dad died. You were so busy building your empire you barely noticed I existed. His words hit me like punches. Is that what you think? That I didn't pay attention to you? Ethan, everything I did for you. Every store I opened, every investment I made, was to secure your future. so that you would never have to worry about money." He laughed bitterly. "A future? Mom, I'm 43 years old. My future is now. Not in 10 or 15 years when you finally die. I need it now." "Then earn it yourself," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "Work for it like I did. I am not handing over my life's work just because you decided to marry an irresponsible woman and pick up her bad habits." Ethan stood up abruptly. "That was your last chance to do this the easy way, Mom. From now on, everything is going to be different. You will regret refusing me." He stormed out of my house, slamming the door so hard the windows shook. I remained seated in the living room, trembling, tears streaming down my face. Arthur called immediately. "Lillian, I got it all. We have clear evidence of threats, extortion, and intent to commit fraud. This is enough for a restraining order, even criminal charges, if you decide to proceed." But I knew it wasn't over yet. Ethan had shown his true colors, but I needed Heather to fully reveal herself as well. I needed them both to condemn themselves so absolutely that there would be no turning back. Arthur didn't agree with my decision. "Lillian, you have enough evidence. We can proceed legally right now. You don't need to expose yourself any further," he insisted over the phone that afternoon. But I was firm. "Not yet, Arthur. This has to end in a way that gives me peace. I need to see just how far they're willing to go." The following days were silent. Ethan didn't call, didn't write, didn't show up. That silence made me more nervous than his threats, because I knew he and Heather were plotting something, and the uncertainty was torture. Carol came to visit me every day, worried about my emotional state. I was getting thinner, with deep, dark circles under my eyes, sleeping only a few hours each night. A week after the confrontation with Ethan, I received a call from an unknown number. I answered cautiously. "Mrs. Lillian Martinez?" a professional female voice asked. "This is Miss Crane from the law firm of Sandoval and Associates. I'm calling to notify you that we have been retained by your son, Ethan Martinez, to initiate conservatorship proceedings for alleged mental incapacity. You will receive official notification in the coming days." I felt like I'd been plunged into ice water. Even though I knew this could happen, hearing it officially took my breath away. "Conservatorship," I managed to articulate. "My son is trying to have me declared legally incompetent." "That is correct, ma'am. I recommend you seek legal representation immediately. The proceedings will begin in approximately 2 weeks." The call ended, and I stared at the phone with trembling hands. I called Arthur immediately. "I know," he said before I could speak. "I received an informal notice an hour ago. Lillian, this is serious. Ethan has hired one of the most aggressive firms in the city. They're going to fight dirty, but we are prepared. We have the recordings, the medical reports, all the documentation. They don't have a real case, but they will try to create one with false testimony and paid-off doctors." That afternoon, the official notice arrived by courier. Reading the legal document, I felt sick to my stomach. Ethan alleged that I was suffering from advanced senile dementia, that I'd had multiple episodes of confusion, that I was a danger to myself by managing such a large estate without assistance. It included testimony from people I didn't even know, supposed store clerks where I had allegedly acted erratically. It was all lies, pure fabrication. But what hurt the most was reading the last paragraph. Ethan requested to be appointed full legal guardian of my person and my assets, with absolute power to make all medical, financial, and personal decisions on my behalf. Essentially, he wanted to make me a prisoner in my own life. That night, I cried until I had no tears left, not for fear of losing the money, but for the son I had lost. The sweet boy who brought me flowers from the garden, who hugged me tight when he had nightmares, who promised to always take care of me. That boy was dead, replaced by a greedy, cruel stranger. 2 days later, something I didn't expect happened. Heather showed up at my door, alone, with an expression that almost looked friendly. "Lillian, can we talk? Just the two of us, woman to woman." I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me. I let her in, making sure the cameras were recording every second. We sat in the living room, and Heather began with a theatrical sigh. "I know things have gotten out of hand," she started, her voice soft and seemingly conciliatory. "Ethan is very stressed, so am I. But it doesn't have to be this way. We can resolve this civilly. I crossed my arms, watching her with suspicion. Civilly? You think trying to have me declared incompetent with false testimony is civil? Heather waved her hand dismissively. That was the lawyer's idea, not ours. They told us it was the only way to protect the family assets. But I'm here to offer you an alternative. She leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with that cunning that so disturbed me. How about we make a private agreement? You transfer $10 million to us right now, and we drop the entire legal proceeding. Ethan and I will make sure you live comfortably for the rest of your days. You can stay on your estate, keep your independence. Everybody wins. The offer was so absurd it almost made me laugh. $10 million in exchange for you not stealing the rest? Is that what you call a good deal? Heather leaned back on the sofa, her mask of friendliness beginning to crumble. Lillian, let's be realistic. You're 72 years old. How many more years are you going to live? 10, 15 if you're lucky? What are you going to do with $25 million in that time? We're young. We have our whole lives ahead of us. That money would be much more useful to us than to you. It would be more efficient, more productive in our hands. The way she spoke of my death so casually chilled my blood, as if I were a temporary obstacle, an inconvenience that would soon disappear. And what if I refuse your generous offer? I asked, my voice laced with sarcasm. Heather smiled, but it was a cold, calculating smile. Then the legal process continues, and I'm warning you, Lillian, we are going to win. We have doctors willing to testify about your mental decline. We have witnesses who will say they've seen you confused, disoriented. We will paint a picture so convincing that no judge will hesitate to declare you incompetent. Oh, false witnesses and paid-off doctors, I asked directly. Heather shrugged without a hint of shame. Call it what you want. In court, perception is reality. And we are going to create the perception that you are a senile old woman who needs protection. Ethan will be appointed your guardian, and then you'll have no control at all. You'll live where we decide, with the money we give you, under the rules we set. I stood up, feeling rage bubbling inside me. Get out of my house, now, and or for. Heather stood as well, but she didn't head for the door. Instead, she walked slowly around the living room, touching my things, appraising my home as if it were already hers. Nice estate, she commented casually. It must be worth an easy $3 million. Maybe more. Ethan and I have already spoken to real estate agents. As soon as we have control, this is the first thing we're selling. Selling my home, my voice broke. My husband is buried here. My son grew up here. This house holds 35 years of memories. Heather looked at me with something that almost looked like pity, but was really contempt. Oh, Lillian, memories don't pay debts. This property is a liquid asset waiting to be monetized. You'll go to a retirement home, something modest but adequate. You don't need all this space. In fact, in your deteriorated mental state, it's actually dangerous for you to live alone in such a large place. She walked to the window overlooking the garden, where my husband's grave was marked by a simple oak tree and a commemorative plaque. We'll even have to have the remains exhumed. The new owners probably won't want a cemetery in their backyard, of course. Maybe we can move the bones to some cheap public cemetery. Something inside me snapped in that moment. It wasn't just rage, it was something deeper, more primitive. I walked toward Heather with firm steps, looking her directly in the eye. Listen to me carefully, because I'm only going to say this once. You will not touch this house. You will not touch my husband. You will not touch a single dollar of my money, because I am going to destroy you and my son, completely. Heather laughed, a sharp, unpleasant sound. You? Destroy us? Lillian, you're a lonely old woman against a team of lawyers, doctors, and witnesses. You don't stand a chance. In 2 weeks, you'll be declared incompetent, and everything you've built will be ours. Ethan will have power over every account, every property, every investment. And the first thing we'll do is cut off your credit cards, your access to cash. You will be completely dependent on us for everything. She headed for the door, but stopped and turned one last time. Oh, and that charitable foundation you love so much, the one you support with $100,000 a year, we'll be canceling that too. That money can be used for more important things, like paying off those debts you're so worried about. The poor children can find other benefactors. After Heather left, I stood in the middle of my living room, shaking with rage and resolve. I called Arthur immediately. "Arthur, I need you to speed everything up. The trust, the transfers, everything. And I need you to contact the press. Heather just confessed to everything. Fraud, conspiracy, intent to commit perjury. The cameras recorded every word. I want this to be public. I want everyone to know exactly what kind of people my son and my daughter-in-law are." Arthur was silent for a moment. "Lillian, if you make this public, there's no going back. Your relationship with Ethan will be permanently destroyed." "It's already destroyed, Arthur," I replied, my voice firm. "The Ethan I knew died a long time ago. The man that's left only cares about money, and if he wants a war, I'm going to give him one he will never forget." I didn't sleep that night. I stayed awake, planning every move, every strategy. They thought I was a helpless old woman, easy to manipulate and control. They were about to find out they were terribly, terribly wrong. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Arthur and I worked tirelessly, preparing our defense and, more importantly, our counterattack. The recordings of the conversations with Ethan and Heather were transcribed, authenticated, and prepared as evidence. The private investigator, Russo, provided us with additional documentation on Heather's debts, including records from online casinos, loans with usurious interest rates, and threats from debt collectors. But I wanted more than just to defend myself. I wanted justice. I wanted Ethan and Heather to face real consequences for what they had tried to do to me. Arthur contacted an investigative journalist who had done several reports on financial abuse of the elderly. When we showed him the evidence, his eyes lit up. "This is explosive," he said. "A story that combines family betrayal, greed, and a calculated attempt to strip an elderly woman of her estate. This is going to get a lot of attention." Meanwhile, the legal process moved forward. I received subpoenas for medical evaluations with court-appointed doctors. Arthur accompanied me to each one, ensuring everything was documented properly. The neutral doctors, with no connection to either party, confirmed what I already knew. I was in full command of my mental faculties. Some even commented that I had a lucidity and mental sharpness superior to many people decades younger. Ethan and his lawyers submitted their testimonies. I read each one with a mixture of disbelief and pain. A supposed grocery store employee who claimed to have seen me confused, unable to remember my address. A neighbor who allegedly found me disoriented in my own garden. A bank teller who said I had tried to withdraw money without knowing my own account number. It was all lies, pure fabrication. Arthur investigated each witness and discovered financial connections to Ethan or Heather. The bank teller turned out to be Heather's cousin. The supposed grocery store employee had received $5,000 in her account 2 days before signing her statement. The evidence of perjury was overwhelming. Arthur presented everything to the judge, along with the audio and video recordings of the threats and confessions. We requested not only that the conservatorship case be dismissed, but that criminal charges be filed against Ethan and Heather for fraud, attempted extortion, conspiracy, and perjury. 3 days before the court hearing, Ethan finally called me. His voice sounded different, less confident, almost desperate. "Mom, we need to talk. Please. This has gotten out of control." Arthur, who was listening on his extension, motioned for me to keep talking. "I'm listening, Ethan," I said in a neutral voice. "Mom, I know things got ugly. I know Heather and I said horrible things, but it doesn't have to go to court. We can settle this as a family. Please, drop the charges. Drop the counterclaims. We can start over." "Start over," I repeated, feeling bile rise in my throat. "Ethan, you tried to steal everything from me. You hired false witnesses, corrupt doctors. You planned to lock me up in a cheap nursing home while you sold my house and desecrated your father's grave. And you want me to just forget it?" "It was Heather," Ethan exploded. "It was all her idea. I was just desperate. The debts, the pressure. She manipulated me. Mom, you have to understand. It wasn't really me." The cowardice in his words disgusted me. Even now, facing the consequences of his actions, he couldn't take responsibility. He had to blame someone else. "Ethan, you are a 43-year-old grown man. No one forced you to do anything. You chose money over your mother. You chose greed over love. And now you're going to live with those consequences. Mom, please. His voice broke. I'm going to lose my job if this goes public. My reputation will be destroyed. They could put me in jail. Is that what you want? To see your own son in prison? Tears were streaming down my cheeks, but my voice remained firm. What I wanted was a son who loved me. What I wanted was to grow old in peace, surrounded by family. But you destroyed all of that. So now, I'm going to protect myself the only way I can. I hung up before he could answer. The night before the hearing, Carol stayed with me. We sat on the patio, drinking tea as we watched the stars. Are you sure about this, Lillian? My friend asked, softly. Once you cross this line, there's no going back. Ethan could go to prison. Your relationship with him will be over forever. It's already over, Carol, I replied. The Ethan I love doesn't exist anymore, and if I don't stop the man he's become, he's going to destroy me. The morning of the hearing, I dressed with care, choosing a gray suit that projected seriousness and dignity. Arthur picked me up early, and we drove to the courthouse in silence. When we arrived, reporters were outside. The investigative journalist had published his article the night before, and the story had gone viral. Elderly millionaire faces son's attempt to steal her fortune. The headlines were sensational but accurate. I walked into the courthouse with my head held high, ignoring the cameras and microphones. Inside, I saw Ethan and Heather sitting with their lawyers. Ethan avoided my gaze, but Heather glared at me, her eyes filled with pure hatred. The hearing began, and the judge, a woman in her 50s with a stern expression, reviewed all the submitted documents. Ethan's lawyers tried to argue that the recordings were obtained illegally, but Arthur proved I had a legal right to record conversations in my own home. They presented the testimonies from their false witnesses, but Arthur dismantled them one by one with evidence of their connections to Ethan and the payments they had received. They presented the reports from Dr. Jennings, but Arthur showed that the doctor had been previously investigated for giving false testimony in similar cases. Then it was our turn. Arthur presented the official medical evaluations confirming my mental competence. He presented the audio and video recordings where Ethan and Heather admitted their plan. He presented the financial evidence of Heather's debts and her gambling addiction. He presented the emails between Ethan and real estate agents where they discussed selling my estate before I was even gone. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable. The judge listened to everything with an increasingly severe expression. When the presentations were over, she called for a 30-minute recess to review the documents. Those 30 minutes were the longest of my life. I sat on a bench outside the courtroom, Carol by my side holding my hand, while Arthur reviewed his notes. Ethan approached at a moment when Arthur had stepped away. "Mom, please," he pleaded in a low voice. "You can still stop this. Tell the judge it was all a misunderstanding. I promise I will never bother you again. Just don't send me to jail." I looked into his eyes, searching for any trace of the boy he had been. But I only saw a frightened man facing the consequences of his actions. "Ethan, you chose this path. Now you have to walk it to the end." Heather appeared behind him, yanking his arm. "Let's go, Ethan. This bitter old woman is going to regret this. We'll appeal, we'll fight. She can't win." Arthur returned at that moment, stepping between them and me. "I suggest you return to your lawyers and prepare for the judge's decision. Any further attempt to contact my client will be reported as witness intimidation." When we were called back into the courtroom, my heart was beating so loudly I could hear it in my ears. The judge entered, her face serious and unreadable. She sat, arranged the papers in front of her, and began to speak. After reviewing all the evidence presented, this court finds that there is no legal basis whatsoever to declare Mrs. Lillian Martinez mentally incompetent. The independent medical evaluations confirm she is in full command of her faculties. Therefore, the conservatorship case brought by Mr. Ethan Martinez is dismissed with prejudice. Ethan dropped his head into his hands, but the judge wasn't finished. Furthermore, this court finds sufficient evidence of fraud, conspiracy, perjury, and attempted extortion. I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for criminal charges to be filed against Mr. Ethan Martinez and Mrs. Heather Martinez. I am also granting a permanent restraining order, prohibiting them from coming within 500 yards of Mrs. Lillian Martinez or her property. The judge's gavel struck the bench with a sound that echoed through the courtroom like a final clap of thunder. Heather leaped to her feet, screaming that it was an injustice, that I had manipulated them all, that her lawyer was incompetent. Security guards had to escort her from the courtroom as she continued to hurl insults. Ethan just sat there, head bowed, defeated. He never even looked at me as I walked out. Outside the courthouse, the reporters were waiting. Arthur had prepared a brief statement, but I felt the need to speak directly. I stopped in front of the cameras, Carol at my side, holding my arm. "What happened to me can happen to any older adult," I began, my voice clear and firm. Elder financial abuse is a silent epidemic. Children, grandchildren, caregivers, they can all become predators when they see an opportunity. I had the resources to fight back, a good lawyer, an education, the means to hire investigators. But many elderly people are not so lucky. They are silenced, stripped of their assets, and abandoned. My story should serve as a warning and as an inspiration. It is never too late to stand up for yourself, and we must never allow fear or a misguided love to turn us into victims. The following weeks were a media whirlwind. My story appeared on national news, in magazines, on talk shows. I received hundreds of letters from other older adults sharing their own stories of abuse, thanking me for speaking out. Some of them broke my heart. Seniors who had lost everything to greedy relatives, living in poverty while their children enjoyed the stolen money. Ethan and Heather faced a criminal trial. The evidence was so overwhelming that their lawyers advised them to take a plea deal. Ethan was sentenced to 18 months in prison, a reduced sentence in exchange for his full confession and cooperation in identifying the false witnesses they had hired. Heather received 2 years for her role as the primary instigator. They were also ordered to pay restitution and damages, though both were bankrupt, and I would likely never see a cent. The hardest part was watching my son being led away in handcuffs. Despite everything he had done, a part of me, that maternal part that never fully dies, ached with pain. Carol was with me that day. I cried on her shoulder, not for the man Ethan had become, but for the boy I had lost somewhere along the way. When did he change? Was it gradual, or was there a specific moment when greed replaced love? I'll probably never know. I decided to use my experience for something positive. With Arthur, I established a foundation dedicated to protecting seniors from financial abuse. We offer free legal counsel, education on how to protect one's assets, and emotional support for victims. I donated $5 million to start the project, and we have already helped over 200 people in the first year. Every case we win, every senior we protect, gives meaning to my pain. My estate became a place of peace again. Without the constant threat of Ethan and Heather, I could go back to enjoying my gardens, my sunsets, the simple joy of living in the home I built. Carol practically moved in with me, and we discovered that 2 widows can create a family as valid as any other. We had dinner together every night, worked in the garden, and traveled to places we'd always wanted to see. 6 months after the trial, I received a letter from Ethan. It had been sent from prison, and for a moment, I considered not opening it, but curiosity won. The letter was short, written in a shaky hand. "Mom," it began, "I don't expect you to forgive me. I wouldn't forgive myself if I were in your shoes. These months in prison have given me a lot of time to think, to really see what I became. Heather filed for divorce last week. She says it's all my fault, that I dragged her into this. I guess it's easier to blame someone else than to accept responsibility." The letter continued. "I've been going to therapy here, talking with a counselor about my relationship with money, with you, with Dad's memory. I realized I always felt like I was living in his shadow, in your shadow. You were so strong, so successful after he died, that I felt insignificant. Instead of working to build my own identity, I looked for the easy way out. I wanted to take what you had built instead of building my own. That's no excuse, I know. It's just an explanation of how I got to this point." It ended with, "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. I just want you to know that I finally understand what I did. I destroyed the most important relationship in my life for money I didn't even really need. I destroyed my own integrity, and now I have to live with that every day. I hope you are happy. Mom, I hope you live many more years, surrounded by people who truly value you. I did love you once, before the greed rotted me from the inside. That version of me still loves you, wherever he is. Ethan. I read the letter 3 times, tears flowing freely down my face. Carol read it too, and looked at me with those wise eyes. Are you going to write back? I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to believe his remorse is genuine, but another part remembers every threat, every attempt to steal from me, every plan to lock me away. How am I supposed to forget that? Carol took my hand. You don't have to forget, Lillian. Forgiveness isn't amnesia. It's choosing not to carry the poison of resentment anymore. But it also doesn't mean you have to rebuild a relationship with someone who hurt you so deeply. You can forgive from a distance. You can wish him well without having him in your life. Several weeks passed before I finally sat down to write a reply. Ethan, I began, I received your letter. I appreciate that you are finally taking responsibility for your actions. I hope your time in prison truly helps you become a better man. That said, I need to be honest with you. I don't know if I can ever fully forgive you. What you did to me wasn't just a mistake or a moment of weakness. It was a calculated campaign to destroy me and steal everything I own. You tried to take my autonomy, my home, my dignity. You planned to desecrate your father's grave. Those are not things that are easily forgotten. I continued writing. When you get out of prison, I wish you the best. I hope you can rebuild your life, find honest work, learn to value the right things. But do not expect a place in my life. That door was closed the day you called me a foolish old woman and threatened to leave me on the street. The son I loved died long before that day, and the man that remains is not someone I wish to know. Live well, Ethan, but live far away from me. Your mother, Lillian. I sent the letter and felt as though a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. It wasn't complete forgiveness, nor was it hate. It was simply closure, the closing of a painful chapter and the beginning of a new one. A year after the trial, I celebrated my 73rd birthday at my estate. Carol organized a small party with friends, some employees from the foundation, and people whose lives we had helped. As I cut the cake, surrounded by laughter and warm conversation, I realized something important. Ethan had been right about one thing he'd said during our confrontation. I was strong and independent. I didn't need anyone in the traditional sense. But that didn't mean I was alone. I had built a chosen family, people who valued me for who I was, not for what I had. That was a wealth no bank account could ever match. That night, after everyone had gone home, I sat on my patio, looking at the stars. I thought about my husband, about the empire we built together, and that I expanded alone. I thought about Ethan, the sweet boy who became a bitter man. I thought about Heather, whose greed consumed her until nothing was left. But mostly, I thought about myself, the 73-year-old woman who refused to be a victim, who fought her own son when she had to, who transformed her pain into a greater purpose, who proved that age is not synonymous with weakness. I touched the necklace I was wearing, a gift from my husband decades ago. He always told me I was stronger than I thought. If only he could see me now, he would have been proud. Some people only show you love until they see the size of your bank account. That was the truth I had learned in the most painful way. But I also learned that when that happens, when people show their true colors, it is our responsibility to believe them, not to excuse them, not to justify them, but simply to believe them and act accordingly. My story didn't have the fairy tale ending I would have wanted. There was no emotional reconciliation with my son, no complete redemption. But it had something better. It had truth, it had justice, it had dignity. And in the end, those things matter more than any fantasy of a perfect family. As the stars glittered above my estate, above my husband's grave, above the gardens I planted with my own 2 hands, I smiled. I had won more than a legal case. I had won my freedom, my peace, my right to grow old with dignity and on my own terms. And that, I discovered, was the real victory.